is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
A lot to do on this program today. Thought it was interesting to learn earlier today from the literary world that Harper Lee, a proud Alabamian, the author of perhaps the most famous novel ever written about the South, To Kill a Mockingbird, will have another book. It's been 55 years since To Kill a Mockingbird was published. It still sells millions of copies. It's still read in schools across the land. And I couldn't help but think of my old friend Pat Dye. He used to be a regular on this show, the former Auburn coach. I assume you've heard this story that we had Dye on a number of years ago. And he said, I won't do the imitation. I can't do South Georgia. But he said, you'll never guess who I saw the other day. And I said, I had been tipped off. I said, who was that, Coach? He said, I went to see Harper Lee. He had read the book late in life, and he was able to wangle an invitation to go see her, which, by the way, doesn't happen. I mean, there have been books written, journalists from across the world who have gone down to Monroeville, Alabama, to hopefully interview the reclusive Harper Lee, who, as I mentioned, has not published a book since in 55 years, and many people, frankly, believe Truman Capote wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. So anyway, I'm talking to Dye. I said, so, Coach, tell me about it. He said, well, I was just sitting there talking to her, Paul, and I just told her what a great book it was. I said, really? So you enjoyed it? He said, yeah, To Kill a Blackbird is one of the best books I've ever read. And that, I mean, and the entire conversation stopped. Twitter was fairly new, but the next thing you know, that was trending on Twitter across the world that Pat Dye had snagged an exclusive audience with Harper Lee to talk about To Kill a Blackbird.
Unbelievable. When I saw the news this morning, the first thing that went through my head is that how long we're going to have to wait to get another book from Paul Finebaum?
Yes. We happen to have the same publisher, Harper. Right. And after dealing with Harper and HarperCollins the last year, it would take 110 years before I ever did another book with them. I mean, it is just a difficult process. I'm not complaining. It was fun. But the New York publishing world is one of the weirdest industries ever. It makes television, makes radio, makes newspapers look almost normal. There's about 8 or 9 people that run it. They all lunch at the same place every day, and they think the rest of us are just second-class citizens if we don't have dandruff on our corduroy jacket with the patches and speak New York literary.
Well, a lot to be said about a book in today's day and age to get this amount of buzz as expected. But obviously it's a tough question for you to answer. But, I mean, 50-plus years later, I mean, giving into this sequel-obsessed society that we are in today, I mean, I don't know. What's the thought process?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I have all the data. There's one school of thought out there that the book was written years ago, back in the late 50s, early 60s, as a sequel to Kill a Mockingbird, and the publisher, big surprise, didn't like it, and Nellie Lee, that's her nickname, just said, I'm not going to do it. It's my theory that she didn't write the book. I mean, I'm sorry. I've read countless books on it. I've done papers. I still believe to this day Truman Capote wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. And if I had written the greatest novel of the last 100 years and had not done another one for 55 years, I would just let it go. I wouldn't flirt with temptation of doing it again. But she's very old, elderly, and there's been many debates about how lucid she is. She's probably watching us right now, throwing something at the TV. Tony Barnhart joins us from Knoxville. And Tony, I have to ask you. I mean, you by now have heard the news that Harper Lee is about to publish the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. Good idea or bad idea when you've written the greatest book ever written?
Well, yeah. Sometimes the second act is hard, but I want to know what happened to Scout. Okay, so you know me, I want to read it and find out.
Yeah, no, I think Scout is, you're talking about Scout.com ratings of National Signing Day or Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird. It was great to visit with you, Stanley. I'm glad to see a Georgia boy sitting in front of Orange. It brings warmth to my heart, Tony.
Well, I may come home. I may get home tomorrow and find out my diploma's off the wall or something. But it's good to be in Tennessee and to be in Paul Finebaum's alma mater, where, as you can imagine, they're pretty excited.
Well, yeah, talk a little bit about that, because Tennessee primed for another buzz on campus. I would imagine is pretty heavy right now.
Well, we just got here and we saw the setup tomorrow. I mean, Paul, when you got to tune in to ESPNU tomorrow and your show and all this, because the setup they have here at Tennessee is unlike anything I've ever seen in terms of a big board and all the production values that go in tomorrow. And it's because that Tennessee's going to sign their second consecutive top 5 recruiting class. And I've heard people on your show saying that Tennessee's a dark horse to win the SEC East. Well, it's because of days like tomorrow that people feel that way.
Yeah, and again, things happen, as you know, Tony, at the last minute, and some Tennessee fans have a little angst tonight. A couple of players have gotten away. I realize this will be more of a story tomorrow, but regardless of that, where do you see Tennessee right now, and do you think they are primed to challenge? I'm assuming you would go with Georgia as the obvious pick next year, or this season, I should say, in the SEC East.
Yeah, I think you go with Georgia as a team right now, but when you look at Tennessee, and, they were close a year ago, Paul, a 1-point loss to Florida, a 3-point loss to Georgia, 8-point loss to Missouri late in the year, and what they lacked was really depth and really great players on the lines of scrimmage. Well, this recruiting class addresses that, plus they're bringing in 3 4-star quarterbacks to really compete for the job behind Joshua Dobbs. So I think all the elements are here, but you know this, Paul, from watching the SEC, it's not just one great recruiting class, it's not just 2, it's 3, 4, and 5, and Tennessee will now have 2 after tomorrow, but it looks like they're on their way.
Yeah, and I remember people telling me a year ago, Tony, that they needed 2 more, and they'll get one tomorrow, and I have no doubt they'll get one a year from today if everything keeps going. But speaking of Butch Jones and Tennessee, yeah, a lot of buzz, but still no real records in terms of the future and in terms of where they're going. I mean, certainly last year was good, but it wasn't great. How good can they be this year?
Right, and just my experience in doing the league for a long time, you got to come close first, and then you got to find a way to break through. I mean, they played Georgia to the wire the last 2 years, but haven't won. They had the lead on Florida, let that game slip away. A game against Missouri, you think they can win at home. Yeah, you can recruit and have all the great classes you want, but until it translates into wins on the field, until you beat people that people think you're not supposed to beat, you haven't made any real progress. And I think Butch Jones would be the first guy to tell you, after this signing class tomorrow, that's the next step, getting ready for Tennessee Team 119.
Tony, Florida's had a rough offseason, or Florida's had a rough couple of years. Let's be honest. They picked up a player last night. They may get some big-time players tomorrow. Is it enough to salvage this class?
Well, it's really, really hard, Paul. You know this. It's really hard when you come in the very first year. You're in a scramble mode. And obviously Jim McElwain, to come in and try to start building relationships in the state of Florida, they fell way behind in recruiting. Now, the great thing about signing day is you can always close fast. And there's those 3 Florida kids that everybody's talking about who were locks for Florida before all this happened. If they could get 1 or 2 of those kids, I think they're in pretty good shape. I still think they'll be fine. Recruiting is really the long view of things. But the world's not coming in if they don't have a top 20 recruiting class tomorrow at Florida.
And finally, let's talk about Mark Richt. The story came out 2 weeks ago. He got the contract extension, got a raise. They're closing very well, certainly another banner year. But let's try to figure out where Mark Richt is right now. If they win the division next year, I'm sure it won't make any bit of difference. But what happens if Georgia has another mediocre year? And mediocre, I mean by that, is not winning the SEC East. That's what's expected in Athens.
Well, there's no doubt it was a disappointing finish for Georgia. I mean, I think when you watch them play week in and week out, they had the best team in the SEC East. They beat Missouri solidly on the road, but they couldn't beat South Carolina, Columbia, and they couldn't beat Florida in Jacksonville. And now, yeah, Mark Richt got a raise. He deserved a raise, all things considered, but now it's time to get back and putting Georgia in position to win another SEC championship. I know, I think Mark Richt's done a very good job at Georgia, but there's no getting around the fact that those losses, you put those two losses with the Georgia Tech loss, it was a disappointing finish. So I think next year it's a big, every year is a big year when you're a coach in the SEC, but I think Georgia needs to bounce back and have a very, very good season and win the SEC East.
And Tony, finally, it's been a month since the football season ended. And I know tomorrow, depending on where you are, what network you're watching, you're going to see the SEC all over the map. But the SEC has taken a lot of hits. Your view of where this league is right now, 2 years now since the SEC has won a national championship, seems like a long time.
Well, and I'll tell you this, Paul, but when you look at what's going to happen tomorrow, you look at the ESPN top 300, and right now, 102 of those guys, a third, are scheduled to sign with SEC schools. So I think you have to say the future of the conference looks bright. When you don't win the championship after winning 7 of the last 8, it seems like forever ago. I think the SEC is going to be fine because Tennessee is on the way back. Florida will come back. Georgia's a good program. Missouri's a good program, and all those schools in the SEC West. Even though they had a rotten bowl season, I think overall all those programs are in pretty good shape. So I think the SEC is going to be just fine.
Tony Barnhart, live in Knoxville. I know you'll have no shortage of places to go tonight to enjoy a good meal. You know that town pretty well, Tony.
I do, Paul. Wish you were here.
I wish I was too. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon. See you tomorrow.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Jerome is next in Birmingham. Hey, Jerome.
What's going on, Paul?
Doing great.
Hey, listen. What are you saying about the SEC is down?
Yeah. I mean, Jerome, did you watch football on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day?
Well, Paul, have you watched football the last 9 years?
Haven't missed a game yet, Jerome.
Okay, so you're going to base the SEC being down because what happened on New Year's Eve, Paul?
I live in the present. Don't look at me. I've done enough boasting over the last 8 or 9 years. I'm talking about today. That's how you are measured. You're not measured on what you did yesterday and the day before and the day before that. You're measured on what are the Seattle Seahawks still the world champions or is someone new the world champions?
I don't give a crap about the Seattle Seahawks. I can care less about the Seattle Seahawks. Listen, let me tell you something. Do you think the rest of the country, if the SEC is down from 1 year, the rest of the country done disappear, Paul? You hear me?
Jerome, I hate to break it to you, but the Big Ten has the national champion in college football this year. The Big Ten.
It's about
last
time,
year,
Paul.
the ACC.
So it's about time, Paul. It is
about time.
You want to have a parade for them? Let's just stop the.
No, I'm just speaking facts. We deal in facts on this show.
Well, the fact is, Paul, it's about time for them to win something. We don't whoop their tail the last 9 years, and about time for them to win one championship.
Well, I mean, you're an Alabama fan, right?
Yeah, I'm an Alabama diehard fan, Paul.
Okay. Well, tell me this, Jerome. You win every year on recruiting day. Alabama wins another #1 ranking. Okay. Well, what does that mean?
That don't mean nothing, Paul. That means we still going 12-2 and almost national champion. Paul,
almost.
Colin Cowherd get up and come on the show every day. What that mean? Nothing.
Hey, okay. What did Colin Cowherd? Colin Cowherd didn't get everything right, but he said the Saban dynasty is over. He said the Saban dynasty is over. Do you believe that or not?
Paul, I do not believe the dynasty is over, Paul. I can care less about what the turds say, Paul. And listen to me. Listen, the rest of the country, enjoy it, Paul. It's about time, as we say, man. Just take your shots at the SEC right now. Who cares? Listen, it's going to take more. You got to catch Alabama in national championship trophy, Paul, before you catch the SEC.
Well, Alabama has to get to the national championship game to win it, Jerome. They haven't been there the last 2 years.
Paul? Listen, we're on a fishing break right now. It's about time for us to go fishing or do something else. Listen, we've been winning championships left and right, Paul. We go down and get a flat or two, have a pop. That's okay, Finebaum. We can't win them all. I want to win them all. We can't win them all, Paul. So the rest of these clowns calling talking about the SEC, man, Jesus Christ, please, gee whiz, Paul. Hear me? We'll be back. The rest of the country, the SEC, hey, Paul, we need to transform. You hear me? Transform into a trophy. I'm sick of you winning one national championship, and God, gee whiz, man, you think you're on top of the world. Enjoy it. Have a good day. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Speaking of the University of Alabama, Lars Anderson joins us, certainly a familiar voice and figure on this program. He now writes for the Bleacher Report, and today he published a story about the process and about the amazing genius of Nick Saban on National Signing Day. Lars, it's been too long. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I know some of this ground you covered in your book, but talk a little bit about going about putting this story together and also what makes Nick Saban so great, not only during the season, but on National Signing Day.
Yeah, a lot of the material that's in this piece was originally slated to run in The Storm and the Tide, but as you know, as someone who's written a New York Times bestselling book, a lot of your original material ends up on the cutting room floor. And so I was able to resuscitate some of that. And what I did was I wanted to interview as many assistant coaches as possible who had been a part of Nick Saban's program at Alabama and get insight from them into what makes Saban such a good recruiter. And, you know, it really can be distilled into something very simple. It's just hard work, and that's what Saban says. And, you know, Alabama devotes time every single day of the year to recruiting, whether it's writing letters, it's looking at film, it's, contacting a recruit. And, you know, by the time that Saban goes into the living room of a recruit or hosts a recruit in his office, Alabama is what they call a 7-deep dive, meaning they have gone 7 layers into that recruit's life and talked to, friends, coaches, classmates, just anyone who would have touched that recruit's life. And they basically have a dossier that is as if the FBI came up with it and did their own independent investigation of this recruit. And, you know, that's why, as I say in the story, when Barrett Jones, who would go on to become, a 3-time All-American at Alabama, when he was sitting in Coach Saban's office, Saban knew to talk to Barrett about what it was like playing the violin when Barrett was, 10 years old. And Barrett was embarrassed by that. He didn't want his teammates to know that he played the violin, but Saban knew all about that because of the deep investigation that they had done. And because of all of the background work that they do, Saban knows exactly what buttons to push and what to stay away from when he is talking with the recruit and his parents. And the biggest thing with what Saban does is he projects a paternal figure, and that he is going to do 2 things. He is going to turn this young man into a young adult of substance off the field, and on the field, on the field, he's going to do everything he can to make him into an NFL player. And, recruits believe that, and families believe that, and the numbers bear that out. And it's just perpetuated over time. And, you know, now if you go by the rankings at Rivals, Alabama is on the cusp of winning its 5th straight recruiting national championship. And, I'm not a huge believer in the rankings, but there is a correlation to finishing in the top 10 and winning national titles in recruiting. So, the people I talk to for the story, they have never seen anything like this. This is a recruiting dynasty that really is unprecedented in college football history.
Let me ask you, Lars, in terms of how he does it. You talked about the war room. You talked about all the detail. I mean, I realize he doesn't hire CIA or FBI agents, but what's your best guess, or if you know, tell us on how they get so deep in the layers?
Well, Coach Saban is very good at giving attention to young recruits, and he has this way of making you feel as if you are the most important person in his life when he is talking to you. And you couple that just with this bottomless pit of energy that he has, that he will go on these recruiting trip binges that would bring most, 22-year-olds to their knees, and just in terms of zigzagging the country in a private jet for 16 straight hours. But he absolutely loves it. I mean, it's the thrill of the hunt that really gets him going. And, that energy is really what powers that entire program at Alabama. And, every assistant I talked to, and it was more than a half dozen, they all just marveled at Saban's energy. And, there are stories floating around in the athletic facility at Alabama that coaches have never seen him yawn. Of course, that's apocryphal, but, it underscores the fact that Saban is the one sort of pushing its entire engine.
Pretty amazing stuff. Let me ask you, in the aftermath of what happened last month, losing to Ohio State, it seemed devastating. It was a crushing blow to end the season, but it didn't seem to faze the recruits one bit. Why?
No, I think it's because Saban, he has a definitive plan for every recruit, and he maps out their 3 or 4 years at Alabama basically down to every hour of every day. This is what you need to be doing. This is where you need to be. This is the schedule you'll follow. And the fact that they didn't win the national championship, I think didn't scare anybody away, because they are reassured by Saban that he knows what he's doing. And again, he's the ultimate sort of, father figure over this whole program. And also, there is a maternal figure over the program as well, and that's Terry Saban, someone you know very good, Paul. She is as charming and warm as sometimes as Saban can be, rough and cold on the outside. And I think she plays a role in the recruiting process in that she can reassure mothers and fathers that their son is going to be in good hands once they get to Alabama. And, they host a big party for recruits at their home on Lake Tuscaloosa after the A-Day game, the spring game in Alabama. And, Terry works the room just as well as Nick does. And she definitely, plays a big role in being almost like the ultimate closer for Alabama when it comes to getting the recruits to finally make a commitment to come to Alabama.
Lars, he's 63 years old. Recruiting is a very difficult business. You've been around him. You're on that campus all the time as a professor. What's your best guess on the future of Nick Saban?
Yeah, I mean, I think he shows no signs of slowing down. He's a young 63, and I did his radio show last fall, and he projects just so much energy, and again, he's the youngest 63-year-old I've ever come across, and I don't see him slowing down right now. But you would think that there could be a burnout factor coming with him, but I would say that he'll at least be around for another 5-6 years, and who knows, could be longer. But you don't see him slowing down at all. And you talk to assistants, and they don't see him backing down on his schedule. And the results of this class sort of bear that out. That he will travel as much as any coach in the country still to get the top players. And it's also helped too. This class, there's a lot of homegrown talent for Alabama, and they seem to get everybody they want. And as several recruiting analysts told me, Alabama now has the ability to go into Texas, Virginia, all sorts of different states, and get the #1 prospect in that state. And it's almost like Alabama, it's like they choose the player. The player doesn't choose them almost. And it's really, again, it's something that we have never seen in college football history, as long as people have really been paying attention to recruiting.
Finally, you quote a lot of the assistants and former assistants in this piece, many of whom have gone on to other schools. Are you able to take the secret recipe out of there and make it work elsewhere? It doesn't seem like anyone's having the same amount of success as Saban.
I think the one person who will really try to duplicate that is Jim McElwain at Florida. because he was so close to Saban for such a long time, and he is going to model everything he does recruiting-wise after what he learned being in Saban's shadow in Tuscaloosa. And, Florida can sell itself and has major selling points in the way that Tuscaloosa doesn't. So I think, to me, I like what Jim McElwain should be able to do in the next 5 years or so.
Great stuff from Lars Anderson, who wrote about Nick Saban and his incredible recruiting machine in the Bleacher Report. Thank you so much, Lars.
Thanks, Paul.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Rich in Atlanta is up next. What do you say, Rich?
Hello, Paul. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
Hey, tremendous show so far. Tony Barnhart, Lars Anderson, tremendous. Thank you. Hey, Paul, I agree with Jerome, but I certainly understand what you're saying. But I've got to be thinking there's some intriguing early out-of-conference games, real early next year. So real quick, what do you think? Alabama, Wisconsin. I think A&M's playing Arizona State. Auburn's playing Louisville here. And obviously Oklahoma's at Tennessee pretty early in the year. What do you think? What's the most intriguing? What's the SEC need to do?
I think all those games are different. Clearly Alabama needs to win. I think they will. Wisconsin to me just seems like a wreck of a program right now, other than beating Auburn. I definitely like Alabama in that game. I like A&M. Louisville-Auburn to me is an intriguing matchup.
Yep.
First game of the year, new quarterback.
Yep.
And
how about
I really
all
like
the subplots, Paul?
What's that?
How about all the subplots, Petrino and Grantham against Malzahn and Muschamp?
Yeah.
How about the two UGA players that were responsible for that tip ball down at Auburn 2 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
They're all Louisville this year. That Josh Harvey Clements and the other kid.
I wouldn't pick. I think that's the game, Rich. If I had to pick one that could be upsetting, I think Tennessee's going to beat Oklahoma. I think it's over for Bob Stoops.
Really? That's interesting, because I think that's the one. Yeah, that's the big measuring stick game. Obviously,
I think he's flirting. He's on a treadmill right now that he keeps slipping and getting up, and I'm just underwhelmed by him and that program, and I think it's become irrelevant.
Larry from Missouri may be calling to disagree with you.
Boy, I can't wait.
Paul, quick. Great. Hey, real quick, you breezed over A&M and Arizona State. I think that's a heck of a game.
It is. I just haven't really.
Football team.
Yeah, they're all good. That's why they're being played at the beginning of the. And you left out, Rich. You left out South Carolina and North Carolina.
Yeah.
Chiswick trying to stop the old ball coach.
Yeah, that's South Carolina's interesting to me also, because they play Central Florida again, also out of conference. Mm-hmm. I saw that too, so that's going to be interesting for that program. But anyway, I just wanted to see your early thoughts on these games, and I really feel the SEC needs to go 4-5-0 to really reestablish themselves, because if they do slip up and say they go 1-3, this is going to be a problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, the opening week of the season definitely sets a tone, just like the last week. And Rich, you and I, we've talked about this. I don't care what you did 10 years ago or 3 years ago. This is a new world, and the SEC has some heat on the conference, and you're just hiding behind. We won 7 in a row. That doesn't matter anymore. The way the last season ended, I think was a little bit bigger than some of the callers so far.
Well, I'll just respectfully disagree. I certainly understand where you're coming from. I just respectfully disagree.
And I'll also say this, Rich. Winning recruiting. The SEC won recruiting last year. Had 3 of the top 4. You have to win the games. You don't have to. You can't hang your hat all the time on winning National Signing Day. I'm a bit weary from all that. Bobby is in Alabama. Next up, what do you say, Bobby?
Hey, Paul, how are you? You had me on yesterday and you cut me off. I'd like to apologize if I said something wrong or said something out of the way to you and to your audience.
Now, let me explain something, Bobby. I mean, we don't cut people off because they disagree. We usually we're just usually moving on to get to a break or something else. That's how we operate here. And I'm sorry, but no, everyone's entitled to a dissenting view. We get plenty of that.
Okay. Well, I was going to make a final comment on that, on Butler making that interception. You know, that's great talent for someone to do that, to be hit at the same time they catch a ball. You know, 1 out of 10 times, that's the only time he's going to make it. He may make it out, but 1 out of 100. But, you know, Saban in his recruiting, you were talking to this guy about, and he was talking about his wife. Behind every great man is a good woman. You know, and they're like family down there. If you ever around any of them, I know you are, but these sideline fans, most of them are not around or ever had the opportunity to speak with someone like that. But they're like family at Alabama, and that's the way we are in Alabama. I had Bert Bryant come to me in Scottsboro when I played football up here in Stevenson, laid that big old hand up in my hand and shook hands with me and said, son, if you'll put on a little weight, you can play ball for me. But that was in 1960.
Bobby, appreciate the story.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
David is up next in Florida. Hey, David.
Paul, thank you for taking my call. I'm sitting on the back porch here in Sarasota in my shorts and my Georgia 2005 SEC champion shirt, and it's looking a little worn.
Hold on to it.
Yeah, it may be. It's not the last one.
Could be another one in about 10 years.
Hey, I wanted to respond to Ron that called from Ocala earlier and made the statement that all the great recruits come from California, Texas, and Florida. Georgia is perennially number 4 in numbers of 4 and 5 recruits, and per capita, it's not even close when you consider the size of Georgia versus those other 3 states. And we've also had the top recruit in the country in the last 2 out of the last 4 years, including this year with Trent Thompson, and then the DE that went to Ole Miss. He played just south of Athens in Grayson, Georgia. So I want to clarify that. If it wasn't for Georgia, Auburn and Alabama couldn't even put together teams.
Okay,
anyway,
well, I mean, that's great. I mean, it's a good point, but still.
Well, let me ask you something. Have you heard anything on Godwin, Terry Godwin? Is he sticking with Georgia? Is that a solid? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we have a listen. We try not to deal with great specificity on players because it's complicated. We will tomorrow. We'll go over the whole board, but we'll talk to Luginbill in a few minutes and ask him what's changed since we last spoke. Charles is up next. Charles calling from Alabama.
Reeltown, Alabama, Paul. Love this little community on the plain. Why ain't you have me on that list of guests talking about recruiting? I'm an expert on recruiting, sports, and anything else you want to know. I'm like E.F. Hutton. When I speak, people listen. Auburn, turn in, everybody tune in to ESPNU tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. That's when Byron Clohart is going to give his pledge to Auburn University. And when he does that, it's going to open the door for C.C. Jefferson, Jeffrey Holland.
Charles, let me stop you. No one really wants to hear your propaganda. We can wait till tomorrow morning to see where all these players are going, okay?
Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, no, you already said that, Charles. Tell us something new, okay?
Well, I thought you were
How about
talking
an original? How about an original thought?
You, talking about recruiting? That's the talk of the day, ain't it?
Ain't it?
Ain't it? I asked you first.
Hey, let me ask you: are you going to read the new novel by Harper Lee?
Yeah, I probably will.
Did you read
the first one? I got to read the first one first, Paul.
You have not read To Kill a Mockingbird?
No, I've seen a movie of it.
You've seen the movie? Well, haven't we all?
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Good answer, Charles.
I'll probably watch the movie of the next. Where I read the book.
What is the, not the Bible, of course, but what is the last book you read?
Oh, I read a lot of novels, Gresham, and, I like it.
Gresham?
The actual really book I read, if you want to call it that, is Andersonville, and I love that book.
Andersonville, that was a great
book. I love
book.
that book, Paul. Yeah. That was a good book about the South and all that. I like history anyway.
You're a big Civil War guy, huh?
Yeah, I like that. Any kind of history. I like that history. But I'll tell you one thing about this new recruiting thing. Let me finish up on this, please.
I figured the last book you read was the Pat Dye story.
I did read In the Arena, to tell you the truth about it.
Yeah, it was a good book. That was Pat Dye's book.
Yeah, I read yours. That was probably my last book I read. I was in it, but I wasn't in it much.
Which book was that?
The last book you wrote.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Our conference is better than your conference, which was a flop. I tell you something else, Paul. Alabama, they might have the #1 recruiting class this year, but that's going to be the last year. You know why?
You think so?
Because they got recruits leaving now.
I thought you said about 3 years ago that they wouldn't have another #1 recruiting class.
Well, it's catching up with them now. You can't keep bringing in 4- and 5-star recruits and putting them behind 4- and 5-star recruits. They come in promising them early playing time when they ain't telling them the truth. They ain't going to get no early playing time because they got so many 4- and 5-star recruits ahead of them. All they're doing is lying to these players, and I don't know how else they're doing. You know, there could be a little money changing hands. I'm just saying. But anyway, this is their last #1 recruiting class. And what I don't understand is the Bams can't take it to be the #1 recruiting class in the nation. They got to stretch it all the way to being a national championship in recruiting. Ain't no such thing. Only the
Hey Charles. Answer me one question,
Alabama
okay?
Charles.
Who won the Iron Bowl?
That don't mean no difference. That don't mean they're going to win it next year or the year after. Alabama, the cracks in that foundation of the Alabama nation will begin to crack for the last 2 years. It's going to crack even more next
Charles,
year.
Alabama went 12-2 and finished #4 in the country. Your team went 8-5.
That don't make no difference.
You lost to Texas A&M, a team that Alabama beat 59-0.
The top 5 class in recruiting. Well, we on the rise. Alabama's cracks in their foundation.
Yeah, Alabama's crashing. Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much. Joe is up next in Alabama. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Paul. How you doing?
Okay, thank you.
I noticed a disturbing trend this year. I think it's kind of trickled down from the NFL. It just seems like the officials are getting more and more involved in every game to determine outcomes, especially there at the end. And it seems like every play, when it doesn't go a certain way, players are jumping up and down, wanting flags, or coaches are jumping up and down, wanting flags. What happened to just playing the game and letting it be decided on the field instead of officials getting involved, or just hard-nosed football that we used to watch back in the day that just doesn't exist anymore?
It's a good point. And, of course, with everything being reviewed, it does slow the game down, although, Joe, I'm in favor of that. We'll talk about officiating one day when things slow down, but it's a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up. Jason is next up in Florida. Jason.
How you doing, Mr. Finebaum?
Doing great.
I just kind of wanted to say about, you said earlier that 7 years or 8 years in the SEC, it really doesn't matter what have you done for me lately. Well, history does repeat itself. And, people hate the SEC because they've won so much. And the guy that just called from Auburn, the older guy, well, what are you, the War Damn Eagles or the Tigers? In Gainesville, we're the Gators. In Tallahassee, they're the Seminoles. What are you, the War Damn Eagles or the Tigers? Let me go on by just saying McElwain will be fine. The Gators will be fine. We have a lot of great players in Gainesville. We have a lot of young players. Muschamp did not leave, the University of Florida below the ground. You look at what 3 other defensive backs. You have Vernon Hargraves. He's going to be a junior. He'll probably go next year. But then you have 2 or 3 other defensive backs that are freshmen or redshirt sophomore. Their defensive line is going to come back strong. McAllister will be good, and so if we only get 13 this year, if you don't want to play in Gainesville, follow Muschamp to Auburn. I mean, the bottom line is you're following an assistant, a defensive coordinator. You either want to play for Florida or you don't. See ya. And I love your show, and thank you for taking my call.
Thank you very much. Glad to hear from you. Logan is in Florida. Good afternoon, Logan. Thank you.
Thank you for taking my call, Mr. Finebaum. I respectively would like to ask a question that has nothing to do with what's going on today and probably going to cut me off. But I am still agitated about the NCAA. What is the NCAA up there for? They restore all of Joe Paterno's games. They give back the scholarship. I personally thought, and I've told you this before, that the Penn State should have been given the death penalty, and because of what Joe Paterno, who was my personal hero for many, many years, he then protected a monster. And you got Bobby Bowden, who had, he lost 11 or 12 games, had taken away from him because they were cheating. They were academically cheating. And Bobby Bowden was not proven or wasn't even accused of being a part of that cheating. Why don't they give him back his games that they took away from him?
Well, it's a fair question, but I think you look at the Florida State situation. They did lose some games, but they didn't lose a whole lot else. Penn State, like it or not, had their program crushed, and that included scholarships.
They gave them back all the recruits.
Well, no, hold on. Yeah, they did give them back, but it didn't stop it didn't stem the damage done by completely blowing up the program and having coaches swoop into College Station, literally taking star players in the middle of the night, costing them bowl games, costing them so much more. I mean, I don't really care any longer to argue the whole Joe Paterno situation, but I don't see how you can fairly and objectively compare the penalties against Florida State and the penalties against Penn State.
Well, the penalties against Penn State should have been more severe.
Well, that's your opinion. I'm speaking of the reality of the situation. They're not comparable. And by the way, what Florida did was academic. You mentioned it. They had an advantage academically. I'm still to this day not sure, trying to keep this within the confines of the NCAA, what Penn State did to enable the NCAA to do what it did. I mean, to me, there was a criminal case. It's a civil case. It was not an NCAA case. I appreciate your thoughts. So, Will is in Oxford, Mississippi, and good afternoon, Will.
Paul, you couldn't be more right. The NCAA had no business in that case at all. All they did was stick their nose where it didn't belong. But anyway, that's not why I called. I called reference to Alabama recruiting. Seems everybody's worked up, this time of year. Well, it's basically just like the beginning of the season, But, as long as you got Nick Saban and his methods are proven. He's solid in recruiting. He is obviously the best in the country at it. If not, he wouldn't have the track record he does. But piggybacking off of that, I guess what I'm wanting to know right now, or kind of what I'm seeing, is I'm starting to see more of a trend of our players who are releasing from scholarship. Saban, you've talked before, seems to be the kind of guy that with his coaches, instead of just firing them and kicking them out, he gives them the opportunity to leave with grace so it doesn't look bad. Is that what he's doing with, i.e., Tenpenny, Liner, who just got released from scholarship yesterday? Is that what that is, or is these players realizing, look, I'm not really getting the playing time I thought I should? I mean, do you see a pattern there, or is that something?
No, I think that's been going on for a while. I mean, it's a numbers game, and the numbers get pretty tight right now. There was a gray shirting issue years ago that became more difficult. So at some point, I'm not trying to compare this to deer season, but you have to thin the troops out. And a lot of times, I mean, you bring in 18, 19, 20, 24. They're not going to all work out. You know that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, Liner, he had seen some playing time. He burned his red shirt right there against Tennessee. But, he got him some playing time. Of course, Tenpenny, he had bursts, but he also had trouble issues. So, I mean, I figured there was a lot of cutting of wood, maybe some saying, okay, well, you've been in trouble. We're going to let you leave with grace, that kind of thing. I think Nick Saban has more class than what most people ever get him credit for helping some people save face to where other places they might not have gotten that chance.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
As we head toward tomorrow, big day, of course, National Signing Day, Tom Luginbill joining us. And Tom, certainly the night before, there are a lot of issues, questions. Will we hear anything tonight, or is it all about tomorrow morning?
I think for the most part it's about tomorrow morning. You know, these coaches right now, they're trying to avoid any surprises. The last thing you want to do is go to your head coach as an assistant and say, hey, I need you to talk to Johnny Jones's dad or, you know, Gary Smith's coach. The head coach never wants to hear that. And so you got unlimited phone calls right now. These coaches are grinding on the phone. No more in-person contact. No more on-campus contact. For the most part, in some areas, to haze in the barn, outside of ensuring that there are no surprises. What's going to be great, I think, about this signing day is there are so many players that have yet to make their verbal commitment, that have pushed it all the way through January, have really maximized their time to get all the head coaches in the home, take all the official visits to hopefully, this is what I hope for these young people, is that they take the time to educate themselves on all the different variables that go into it to avoid making a mistake, just like the coaches are trying to do the same thing to avoid making a mistake on the prospect. And so this thing's going to go down to the wire, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see how maybe the last weekend of official visits or that last head coach that was in the home, what type of impression did they make that could seal the deal.
In studying this over the years, what usually impacts a player who has not made a decision before signing day?
The player-coach relationship. And I think, you know, you'd like to think and hope that there's a lot of substance to the decision. You know, do I fit in academically? Do I fit in socially, athletically? Where do I fit? All these different variables. But really what it comes down to is, how do I feel about this coach, that area coach, or this position coach, or do I have a close relationship with the head coach? And there isn't a lot of thought, and I think there is with some of the kids that have been advised properly throughout the process, that the reality is you're probably not going to play for that coach during your tenure, just because there's so much going on in the coaching profession that can create chaos and change. And so it's all about relationships, which is why I think the whole unique dynamic of what's happening between Auburn and Florida right now is so unusual, because with the situation that's taken place at Florida, rarely do you have a coach that's been fired not sit out maybe a year, maybe two, or maybe he goes and he takes another head job somewhere. But you don't have a situation where a guy decides to become a coordinator the very next year in the same conference. And then again, that's where those established relations come into play. How's that going to affect Auburn tomorrow? How will that affect Florida tomorrow?
Those are the stories that will dominate early in the day. So let's, you probably know this by heart since you set it up. Let's start tomorrow morning. And if in politics you watch the map, if you're sitting at home tomorrow watching you, what are you looking for? What are the key moments?
I think a couple of things. Number one, we talked about that Auburn-Florida dynamic. The state of Florida probably has the most high-profile, uncommitted prospects. So it's our number one ranked offensive tackle, Martez Ivey, our number one ranked defensive end, and number one overall player, Byron Cowart, C.C. Jefferson, Jeffrey Holland. State of Florida is really open right now. Same with the state of California. So if you're watching the West Coast and you're seeing players like Rasheem Green and Iman Marshall and John Houston, guys that have been national prospects but are on the West Coast, how does SC wrangle all of these guys in now that they're off of scholarship sanctions and they're back up to full scholarship complement? I think those are the big storylines of the day. And then looking at the assistant coaches and the shifts. We haven't had a lot of head coaching shifts. But how is LSU affected by the addition of Ed Orgeron and Kevin Steele? We've talked about Auburn and that relationship with Will Muschamp and prospects. He's recruited for 2 or 3 years. And then for Jim Harbaugh out of the Big Ten, Mike Riley out of the Big Ten at Nebraska, certainly with Wisconsin as well, and Paul Chryst. And, all of those dynamics, you have such a little amount of time to make a splash. I don't think any of them are going to be judged upon these last 2 to 3 weeks in a recruiting class that they didn't go out and pursue for the past year and a half. But it does create a foundation and a nucleus that you hope to be a positive one at the end of tomorrow.
In the before-mentioned Florida-Auburn battle, I know this is the game that most people are watching. Is there a best and worst-case scenario for Florida?
I think there is. For Florida, I don't even think it's a worst case if they don't get all of them. If they were to secure 1 or 2 of them, I think that's a real positive. I really do. And keep in mind, Jim McElwain's been in a very untenable position right here, and doesn't generally happen. He's on the road introducing himself, while another competitor in the conference has had an 18-month relationship with a lot of these same kids. And so, if you're Florida, you got to feel like if you got a couple of them, if you got a combination of Ivy and Jefferson or Jefferson and Cowart, whatever it may be, you got to look at that as a positive. On the downside of things, if you get swept, it's not overly positive, certainly, but I don't think it's something that is catastrophic. Because, again, Jim McElwain was hired because of his offensive background and to get that thing fixed up. There's a good core nucleus at Florida on defense. And so going forward, if you're a Florida fan, feel okay about what Jim McElwain's going to be doing. Understand the situation was very difficult that he stepped into right now.
I mean, you would think without knowing anything, Muschamp has a natural pull with these players. But as you get closer to actually signing, wouldn't it swing a little bit more back toward Florida?
You would think from how those players have identified through their upbringing the University of Florida, because when you grow up in that environment and you've been recruited and there's obviously something besides an individual that drew you to the program, then you'd like to think, and I think there's a handful of programs that fit into what I'm about to say right now, where a program is bigger than one individual. You know, Urban Meyer steps down at Florida. Florida went right along, you know, and they ended up surviving, recruited some good classes. That's not always going to be the case, and not every program probably has that luxury. I think Florida probably does. The question is, will it influence enough of those prospects currently right now that do have established relationships with Will Muschamp?
We're almost not even talking about Alabama anymore because they've had number one secured for a year, although I hear some people saying they could lose it depending on what happens in California. Now, these aren't your polls.
Right.
There are a lot of other services out there, in case you haven't heard.
Right.
Talk a little bit about Alabama. Where are they, and what's at stake?
Well, I think the reason why most people say that is they see the ground to be gained by USC, as I referenced, or by an Auburn and some fluctuation there. Listen, Alabama's to the point right now where I think they've gotten overloaded. We've seen them attempt the gray shirt route with Rico McGraw. He says no, he's going to go elsewhere. That might be happening with Christian Bell, a linebacker that's committed right now too. What they're wanting to do is avoid surprises, lock it down, go into tomorrow, and know this is our group. I don't think they're expecting anything negative to happen. Listen, you watched Alabama this year. Where do they have deficiencies? Where do they have needs? Okay, well, linebacker, got to add depth at quarterback, got to continue in the offensive line, and the defensive secondary needs more bodies. That's exactly where all their top-graded guys are in this class. So if you're an Alabama fan, you've got to feel good about, you know, needs being addressed.
I mean, there are one or two players out there that are still looking at Alabama, and if they start getting these players, where do they put them?
Well, if they're still looking at Alabama and Alabama is able to work their numbers, then they may have room for them. You know, and a Dalen Charlot could be one of those, the wide receiver, you know, choosing between LSU and Alabama and in which way it's going to go there. Listen, because we're kind of getting into the over-signing discussion here inadvertently. What people have got to understand is there's various different ways that your roster can be manipulated. You're always going to massage the numbers. You're going to have scholarships come up at mid-year. You're going to have scholarships come up in June. You're going to have them come up in the middle of the summer. You're going to have kids going to graduate school. Now you have a scholarship available. It's not as clean and cut and dried as you have 25 and then you have 25. That's not how it works. So while you're continuing to try and figure out how you make room and how you make space, the downside to all of this, if you are somebody who's critical of the recruiting process when it comes to throwing out offers and not taking every guy, is were you up front with the player about what could happen down the road? That's to be decided by who's making those assessments, who's making those offers, and whether they're honoring them. But the reality is rosters are massaged by every program in college football across the board to make room to try and bring in the best, most talented roster they can.
Tom Luginbill, certainly big day tomorrow.
Yeah, man.
Get some rest.
All right, ready for Thursday.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Rick is in L.A. Rick, thank you for the phone call.
Well, thank you, Paul. Hello, John. God, there's so many things. First of all, I just want to make a comment. You have one of your regular callers who I enjoy very much, Rich from Atlanta.
Oh, yeah.
He brings up good topics. He brings up good stuff. Rich, you do a great job. I really enjoy your calls when you call in the show. Paul, I don't know where to start with. I guess thank you, first of all, to Tom Luginbill. He brought out a really great point, which the public doesn't really know. Just because you read or hear about a school getting 20 scholarships, 22, that doesn't mean it's locked in. They find ways to find scholarships all year round. They get kids in through the quarter system. It's an unbelievable BS to hand the public. You think, well, how are they getting 35 kids in there when you only got 20 scholarships? They find ways. They do it. I hate to throw a damper on the night before of the recruiting party, I, for one, as I was telling Carlos on the air when I was calling in, I think it's a runaway monster. This old man you're talking to, I love college athletics. It's been my life. It's been my whole life. But I have seen the uncontrollable, out of control, what is going on. I'll just give an example. You're taking high school youngsters. They should be enjoying this time through their life. They got their part, that this is your last enjoyment, and then you're looking at your future. You're a top athlete. You're being hounded from the Sharks from day one. You're getting to a point now, every year now, the last few years, kids are rushing out of high school. They're not even enjoying their time so they could get to that next level of spring practice. It is wrong. I'll tell you what, the media plays a big part of it. I'll tell you something, I got turned off, and I'm not going to watch it tomorrow. It's not no disrespect to you or ESPN or anything. I'm going to wait and wrap it up the next day. I'm tired of seeing young people coming out of high school, playing with the hats, playing with the jersey, like a shell game. I'm going to take this school. You know what? I don't need it.
Let me say something to you, Rick. Do you know who is to blame for what they're doing?
I'm going to go back, and I think it's the shoe companies from Nike and Adidas that started this mess.
No, well, I mean, listen, the shoe companies have had a hand in everything. This may not be a popular opinion where I work, but the people to blame are us, because we put them on television. We set up a time with the high school players. And I don't know how it works. I'm sure Luginbill does. Okay, you're at 8:10. You're on ESPN. You're on ESPNU. You're on the SEC network. You're on wherever, and that's where you're going to take center stage. So, I've been around long enough, Rick, and so have you. When I first started this in the early 80s, you know how recruits committed? The top players would call the newspaper, and if they lived in a small town, and they would say, Mr. Jones, the coach would call, and they put the player on, and he said, I'm committing to UCLA or Auburn or Alabama. And then local television got into it. They started showing up in the cafeteria or in the library, and they would announce, and then ESPN got in the middle of it, and we have what we have tomorrow. And I'm sure they'll probably cut my microphone off, because where I work right now is the biggest center of high school recruiting in America. But
Paul, I just want to say this. Thank you, as always, your reputation. That's why all of us across country, and I'm glad you are national, not just local, because a guy like me on the West Coast, we need a show like this. We have needed a show like this, and thank you for being so honest. I would like to also just duck this in to Logan of Florida, and we've been on it before, and you've been on it before. Joe Paterno, to my knowledge, never won games or bowl games with illegal talent. What took place, like you said, Paul, was a civil matter. It had nothing to do with the NCAA, and it had nothing to do with his wins. What happened at Florida State, different situation with questionable players.
Well said, and thank you very, very much. I appreciate the call. Larry is in Missouri on this Tuesday afternoon. Larry.
Hey, Mr. Finebaum, how you getting along today?
Okay.
Hey, great. Hey, I was going to just let y'all know, I heard y'all on here a little earlier. Y'all ain't got to worry about old Big Game Bonbon slipping on no treadmill. Now, I mean, he's made enough cash. He pays a man $100,000 a year to walk on a treadmill for him. I mean, he ain't slipping. He's kind of like old Teddy. I mean, granted, he's a little long in the tooth, and maybe not quite as good looking as he used to be, but he's still awful handsome. But I do want to say I appreciate your honesty as far as SEC slipping. I mean, you'd be Craig Charles not to say that. I mean, nobody cares, what happened 7 years ago. What have you done for them lately? Now, tomorrow, they'll get another number one class, but let's look at the facts here. I mean, they got the number one place every year, and they've been wiped out back-to-back Sugar Bowls. So maybe you got the best bosses, but maybe you just ain't got the best coaches. And the last thing I'll say, this is kind of on a serious note, TMZ, I saw some still pictures. It was kind of an appalling situation. Nick Saban walking around in some alligator cowboy boots. It's just horrible what Cody did to them poor animals. Thanks, Paul. Throw some.
Okay. Good stuff.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Chris is next in Georgia. How are you, Chris?
Hey, Paul. How are you today?
Quite well, thank you.
Yeah, don't hate on the dollar store. I shop there frequently.
I do too, but I felt that. I mean, he may be he's in the premier section of the dollar store, not the as you check out.
Right, I understand. Well, I just had a quick comment. And first off, thanks for taking my call. I get sick and tired of listening to all these Tennessee fans bump their chests as if their program has done something. Don't get me wrong, like, they have had extremely good recruiting classes the last 2 years, but can somebody please explain to me what Butch Jones has done besides recruit?
What Butch Jones has done is he's sold enthusiasm, he's sold momentum, and he's sold buzz. Now, here's the problem with that. If you don't deliver, it comes crashing down. And we talked about it a few minutes ago. A game at Florida next year is do or die.
Right.
You can't lose 10 in a row. And you can't lose to a program that is downtrodden perceptively, even though that there's some debate about that. So that's why I thought that one loss this year against Will Muschamp in Knoxville was painful, but he made up for it by winning in Columbia. But he'll have to start converting those wins next year, or people will say, you know what? I mean, you're all hat, no cattle, as they say in Texas.
Right. I mean, I'm not comparing him to the first person that came to my mind, and obviously Butch still has at least probably 2 or 3 years left. But I mean, Ron Zook was always the best recruiter, but he could never really put the performance on the field. So, like, and I'm a Georgia fan, so like Mark Richt's a great recruiter, but what has he done for us recently? You know, like, so not that I just want Tennessee fans to kind of like, you know, just calm down your expectations a little bit, because I feel like they think they're going to go into next season and they're just going to be all world beaters or whatever. But I just think, but don't get me wrong, once again, he's done a great job recruiting.
Well, he's done all he can do. I mean, he did not inherit a very good situation, and what he's done is he's sold the future. I mean, how is Saban so successful? He sells Alabama, but what he really sells is you come to Alabama and you'll play in the NFL. And look at this wall here of NFL draft choices. That's what John Calipari sells. I mean, you have to sell something more, and I think he knows what he's doing, and I've watched it. I've walked through that building with him and his assistants, and you can feel it. But if you don't convert it, you end up being Ron Zook.
Right. All right, Paul, I surely appreciate it.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day,
Great
buddy.
call. Really a great point there. Greg is in Ohio, and you are next on this Tuesday evening. Hey, Greg.
Hello. I say, all you Alabama fans can always say there's always next season. But you call and say, or people call in and say that if Ohio State fans are overconfident and the Big Ten Network ain't as good as what the SEC is. Well, from what I see, we're national champions. This is the first time we've had this playoffs, and we whooped Alabama right there in the semifinal. Go on, and we beat the whatever he's supposed to be, that Mario or blah. But
hey, let me stop you for 1 second, Greg, and repeat something that my father and a lot of fathers often said to their children when they were just running at the mouth. Tell me something I don't know.
Well, Alabama can always say they got next season, but I'm telling you, if it comes down to playing Ohio State again, it's going to be a repeat of what happened this year. What's Alabama going to do this next coming season that's going to be so different?
You know
from
what? I'll tell you what, Greg. I know a lot of Alabama fans who can't wait for that opportunity, and I'm a commentator that I can't wait either. I hope it happens. I hope it happens in the championship game, and you're calling in, running your mouth the day before.
I'm just stating the fact we're national champions, and we're going to brag. And all us Yankees up here
listen,
are going to call in.
Greg, you're entitled to brag. You're entitled to run your mouth. You're entitled to flap your wings. You do whatever you want to do. Congratulations.
Well, I plan on it. I'm sure everybody in Ohio does.
I wouldn't take that away. And I'm glad that you live in a country that you can call in somewhere.
But all you SEC fans and all you Alabama fans always have something negative to say, even after we won and we beat Alabama.
Nobody's criticizing what happened on the field. Everyone knows what happened.
All right. Well, I'll just.
Now my question to you, though, Greg, do you feel better having called in and said what you just got through saying? Does that make you feel like a bigger man?
I am feeling a lot better. I tell you that.
Good.
I tell you that, Paul.
I am glad to hear that. I'm glad we could help you.
But I just wanted to say, Alabama, they always have next season. I'll give them that.
I'm thrilled you called. I-Man is up next. Can you top that, I-Man?
I'm just listening, and you just got to give it to that guy. He called in. He's talking smack. And, let me say this, caller. You give Nick Saban 10 months. They said all he needed was a month, but you give him 10 months and you'll probably get the same results. All right, first and foremost, Paul, I really would like to thank all the people and their outpouring and their generosity and their comments concerning my brother. I mentioned to my sister-in-law.
I want to say this to you, I-Man. That call the other day, for those who missed it, is really someone made this comment. I'm just repeating it. He said that's what this show is about, and you brought that home, and I speak for everyone when I say I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Well, to quote John Lennon, life is what happens while we're busy making other plans. And things just blindside you, and you don't expect them. You don't expect to go to the doctor and not go home, and that's what happened. And it's just real touching to me, and especially my sister-in-law. I told her about the outpouring. Some people complain about Twitter. I'm blown away by the response, and that's your show and your listeners and your callers and everything. And I'm just touched and moved by that. So moving on. We've lost another Alabama caller today. What is it with the Alabama callers? They get beaten in the playoffs, and Larry feels like you disrespected him. Where do all these callers feel like you owe them this anointed, entitled respect? I mean, don't they get they're just callers? They're just callers to your show. You didn't call them. And you appreciate their calls and their conversation, if you call it that. But I find it to call back. I'm just kind of shocked that Larry would do that. I thought, hell, he and I were going to go fishing or something. So does that mean the fishing trip is off because he quit? Am I no longer invited to go fishing and never come back?
There ought to be a convention every spring of the callers.
The Quitters Convention. I mean, you can make a movie out of this. I'm telling you, Paul, you got a 4-CD time-life set that ESPN can produce of just the best quitting speeches. I think you ought to give a Finebaum Award to the best quitting speech. And you would have to call in and raise a lot of cane and ruckus and talk about disrespect and all these kind of things.
Well, with all due respect to Larry, I think Jim has retired the trophy in terms of quitting speeches, don't you?
He owns the trophy. The trophy is a picture of Jim, a busted light bulb, something that even Edison couldn't fix. Jim keeps climbing that wall trying to be Humpty Dumpty, but Jim, you have no yoke. Paul, I'm telling you, the Paul Finebaum Quitter Awards, the dude wrote a song here a while back and had me and Dub in it and talking about how we don't get along. Hell, I think me and Dub's the only two that haven't ever quit.
Thank you for listening to the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast. Tune into the Paul Finebaum Show every day from 3 to 7 Eastern on the SEC Network or on the ESPN Radio app.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.